In the early morning hours of March 31, 1596, in the small French village of La Haye-en-Touraine, a boy was born who would, centuries later, be recognized as the father of modern philosophy. René Descartes entered the world into a respected noble family. His father, Joachim, was a landowner and councillor for the Parliament of Brittany. Though the household might have seemed secure and promising to an outsider, it was soon marked by tragedy. Descartes' mother, Jeanne Brochard, died in May of the following year, leaving the infant René in the care of his grandmother. This early encounter with loss and the fragility of life may well have shaped the introspective quality that would define his later philosophical pursuits. René's youth, though privileged by his noble birth, was not without hardship. Chronic health challenges shadowed his early years, and while the specifics remain elusive in the historical record, it is clear that Descartes' constitution was considered delicate. This physical vulnerability may have contributed to his lifelong habit of reflection and withdrawal, a tendency to turn inward that would later fuel his philosophical investigations. At the age of 10, Descartes began his formal education at the Jesuit College of La Flèche, established by King Henry IV and regarded as one of the finest schools in Europe at the time. For 7 years, he immersed himself in a rigorous curriculum, excelling in the humanities and mathematics. The Jesuits emphasized both classical learning and the cultivation of reasoning, providing Descartes with a strong foundation in logic, rhetoric, and the mathematical sciences. Yet, even in this esteemed setting, Descartes was inclined to question his instructor's teachings. The prevailing philosophy of the era, known as scholastic Aristotelianism, sought to reconcile Christian theology with the works of Aristotle. Its explanations of nature and the universe were rooted in ancient authority and tradition, often leaving little room for independent inquiry. Descartes, like many of his generation, found himself dissatisfied with answers that relied on received wisdom rather than demonstrable truth. After completing his studies at La Flèche in 1614, Descartes continued his education at the University of Poitiers, where he obtained his baccalaureate and license in canon and civil law in 1616. The law, with its intricate structures and logical demands, may have appealed to his mathematical mind, but there is little evidence that he found his true calling in legal study. Instead, Descartes' intellectual curiosity led him further afield. The early 17th century was a time of extraordinary ferment in European thought. The so-called New Science was beginning to undermine ancient and medieval certainties about the nature of the cosmos. The heliocentric theories of Copernicus and the telescopic discoveries of Galileo cast doubt on the geocentric model that had dominated Western thought for centuries. For the first time, it became possible to imagine that the Earth was merely one planet among many, governed not by mysterious heavenly influences, but by discoverable natural laws. This shifting scientific landscape did not escape Descartes' notice. Although he completed his law degree, he soon sought a broader education in the world itself. In 1618, he enlisted in the army of Prince Maurice of Nassau, a decision that might seem surprising for a young scholar. Yet for Descartes, military service offered not just practical experience, but also the opportunity to travel, observe, and engage with new ideas. The details of his life during these years are not exhaustively documented, but it is known that his time in the Netherlands and later travels in Germany, Denmark, and Italy exposed him to a variety of intellectual influences. These formative experiences, combined with the contemplative solitude he often cultivated, set the stage for the development of his distinctive method of inquiry. A pivotal moment in Descartes' intellectual journey occurred in 1619 while he was stationed in Germany. That autumn, he reportedly experienced a series of vivid dreams that he later interpreted as a kind of intellectual revelation. Although the precise content of these dreams remains a matter of scholarly interpretation, they appear to have convinced him of the need for a new method of thought, one that would ground knowledge not in tradition or authority, but in reason and doubt. Descartes came to believe that to arrive at certain knowledge, it was necessary first to set aside all beliefs susceptible to doubt and to seek a foundation that could withstand even the most radical skepticism. The world into which Descartes was born was itself a world in doubt. The religious unity of Europe had been shattered by the Protestant Reformation and the ensuing wars of religion, leaving questions of faith and authority unsettled across the continent. At the same time, the rise of new scientific methodologies was challenging ancient explanations of the physical world. Increasingly, the physical and mental world, as well as society, human institutions, and even religion, were being explained by natural causes, by laws and mechanisms that could, at least in principle, be discovered by human reason. This intellectual climate was ripe for a thinker who could bridge the gap between the old and the new, who could offer a method by which certainty might be recaptured in an era of skepticism. Descartes' response to this environment was both radical and constructive. He became a creative mathematician, developing analytic geometry, a discipline that merged algebra and geometry in a way that would later prove foundational for the development of calculus and modern physics. He also published the sine law of refraction, contributing to the understanding of optics. His vision of the natural world was fundamentally mechanistic. He proposed that the universe operated like a vast machine governed by laws accessible to human reason. This was a significant departure from the final causal model of scientific explanation, inherited from Aristotle, which explained phenomena in terms of their ultimate purposes. Descartes replaced this with a mechanistic model, in which causes were understood in terms of matter and motion, a move that helped to shape the modern discipline of physics. Yet Descartes' significance extends beyond his contributions to mathematics and natural science. He is best known as a philosopher and is often credited as a precursor to the rationalist school of thought. Rationalism, as it developed in the 17th century, held that the mind is capable of arriving at fundamental truths through reason alone, independent of sensory experience. Descartes' insistence on the sovereignty of reason would profoundly influence the intellectual currents of his time and the centuries that followed. His method began with the act of doubting all that could possibly be doubted, and from this radical skepticism, he sought to build a new foundation for knowledge. The most famous expression of this approach, Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, would become the cornerstone of modern philosophy. Of course, Descartes' rationalism did not go unchallenged. Even in his own century, the speculative nature of his philosophy was met with skepticism by advocates of empiricism and experimental philosophy. Figures such as Francis Bacon and, later, John Locke argued that knowledge must be grounded in sensory experience and observation, rather than abstract reasoning alone. This debate between rationalism and empiricism would come to define much of the philosophical inquiry of the Enlightenment, the movement that followed Descartes' era. The Enlightenment itself was characterized by the pursuit of happiness, the assertion of the sovereignty of reason, and the demand for evidence derived from the senses. Its primary origin is generally traced to the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, a revolution in which Descartes played a vital role. The rise of the new science undermined ancient geocentric conceptions and promoted philosophy as an independent force, no longer subservient to theology or tradition. Despite his growing fame, Descartes' life was marked by a degree of restlessness. He lived much of his adult life outside his native France, residing for long periods in the Netherlands, where the intellectual climate was relatively tolerant and free from religious strife. In the final months of his life, Descartes accepted an invitation to the Swedish court of Queen Christina, where he was asked to provide philosophical instruction. The harsh Scandinavian winter, combined with a demanding schedule, proved too much for his fragile health. Descartes died in Stockholm on February 11, 1650, at the age of 53. The world that Descartes left behind was forever changed. His willingness to question the foundations of knowledge, to subject even the most basic assumptions to doubt, opened the way for new forms of inquiry not only in philosophy but also in science and mathematics. He helped to establish the notion that reason and methodical doubt could yield certainty, a conviction that would animate generations of thinkers after him. His break with scholastic Aristotelian philosophy, his development of mechanistic sciences, and his insistence on the autonomy of philosophy from theology all contributed to the emergence of the modern world. Yet, for all his achievements, Descartes' legacy is not one of settled answers but of enduring questions. The doubts he raised about the reliability of the senses, the nature of reality, and the limits of human knowledge have never been fully laid to rest. His life and times, set against the backdrop of a Europe in intellectual and religious upheaval, remind us that the quest for certainty is itself an uncertain journey. In this sense, Descartes' story is not merely one of personal triumph or historical innovation, but a testament to the ongoing struggle to understand the world and our place within it. Through doubt, he sought truth, and through his example, he invited all who followed to ask, to question, and to seek with relentless curiosity. Imagine the world as René Descartes encountered it in the early 17th century, a time when received wisdom, theological doctrine, and the authority of ancient philosophers dominated the halls of learning. Into this world, Descartes brought not only intellectual restlessness, but also an audacious question: what, if anything, can we know for certain? He sought a foundation for knowledge so solid that even the most determined skeptic could not shake it. His method, both radical and meticulous, would become the bedrock of modern philosophy. Descartes' approach began with a decisive break from the scholastic tradition that had shaped European thought for centuries. He saw the scholastic method as inherently fragile, rooted in sensation and authority, both, he argued, prone to error and doubt. The senses deceive, traditions harden into dogma. Moreover, scholastic philosophy explained the world in terms of ultimate purposes or final causes, a framework Descartes rejected in favor of a mechanistic vision of nature. But before he could rebuild, he needed to clear the ground entirely to see if anything truly indubitable could withstand the most intense scrutiny. This clearing began with what Descartes called methodic doubt, a process he would later describe in works that defined his legacy: the Discourse on the Method, Meditations on First Philosophy, Principles of Philosophy, and others. The idea behind methodic doubt was not to embrace skepticism for its own sake or to spiral into endless uncertainty, but to use a systematic, even exaggerated skepticism, what he termed hyperbolic doubt, to sweep away every belief that could possibly be false. In effect, Descartes set out to doubt everything, even those things that seemed most self-evident. He posed the question, can any of my beliefs withstand the most radical doubt? To test this, he examined the foundations of his knowledge one by one. Could he trust the evidence of his senses? After all, the senses can deceive. A stick appears bent in water, a mirage shimmers on a hot road. More troubling, there are times in dreams when everything seems utterly real, yet on waking, the dream is revealed as an illusion. If the senses can fool him even once, then anything built upon them must be suspect. Descartes did not stop there. He considered the possibility that even the most basic beliefs, such as mathematical truths, could be cast into doubt. Perhaps, he speculated, an all-powerful being later famously imagined as an evil demon could be systematically deceiving him, causing him to believe that 2 + 3 = 5 when it does not. This thought experiment, extreme as it was, served a purpose: to test every belief down to its roots, to see if anything could survive such relentless skepticism. Through this process, Descartes reached a point of near total doubt. All knowledge based on the senses, all knowledge inherited from tradition, even the certainty of arithmetic, had been called into question. Yet, in the midst of this total skepticism, Descartes made a discovery that would become the cornerstone of his philosophy. As he doubted, he realized that the very act of doubting required a thinker, someone who doubts. Even if everything else is uncertain, the fact that he is thinking, doubting, or being deceived means that he must exist, at least as a thinking thing. This insight crystallized in the dictum, Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. The cogito, as it is often called, is celebrated because it is a statement which, when thought, cannot be false. Even if he were deceived about everything else, Descartes realized he could not be deceived about the fact that he was thinking. The act of thinking itself proves the existence of the self as a thinking being. In the Meditations on First Philosophy, he puts it simply, if I am doubting, I must exist as the subject of that doubt. This moment is more than a clever turn of phrase, it is the result of Descartes' methodic doubt and his search for something absolutely certain. The cogito is not simply a logical inference, but a lived, immediate realization, an experience of certainty that stands alone, immune to even the most radical skepticism. No matter how powerful the evil demon, no matter how deceptive the senses, the thinking self cannot be doubted. Descartes' use of methodic doubt was never meant to be an end in itself. He was not content to rest in skepticism, but sought to use it as a tool to find a foundation for all knowledge. By showing that the cogito is indubitable, he believed he had discovered a secure starting point, a first principle on which the rest of science and philosophy could be built. Just as mathematics proceeds from axioms, Descartes wanted philosophy to proceed from an unshakable certainty. To Descartes, the cogito was not merely a tautology or a trivial truth. It was a breakthrough. For the first time, certainty was established not by appeal to authority or tradition, but by the light of reason alone. The self's existence as a thinking thing is established through the very act of thinking. It is a truth that shines with clear and distinct certainty, which for Descartes became the hallmark of all true knowledge. Anything that could be known as clearly and distinctly as the cogito, he argued, could be regarded as certain. Having found the cogito, Descartes sought to extend the reach of certainty beyond this solitary point. If I think, therefore I am, could be known with perfect clarity, perhaps other truths could be established in the same way. His ambition was to bring the same degree of certainty found in mathematics to all fields of knowledge. In this sense, Descartes was not content to be a skeptic. He aimed to be a builder, reconstructing the edifice of knowledge from the ground up. It is important to note that Descartes' project, especially as presented in the Meditations, was not a solitary endeavor. After completing the Meditations, he circulated the manuscript to other philosophers, inviting their objections and responding with detailed replies. This exchange illustrates how Descartes' search for certainty was not confined to private reflection, but became a public conversation, a defining moment in the history of philosophy. Some critics, even in Descartes' own time, took issue with the cogito. Pierre Gassendi, for example, contended that Descartes presupposed the existence of an I doing the thinking, when perhaps all that could be said is that thinking is occurring. This critique raises the question of whether the cogito establishes the existence of a self or merely the occurrence of thought. Descartes, however, maintained that the very act of thinking implies a thinker, even if that thinker is nothing more than a momentary subject of thought. The philosophical significance of the cogito extends far beyond the question of personal existence. By establishing the certainty of the self through reason alone, Descartes laid the groundwork for a new understanding of knowledge, one in which subjective experience and rational reflection took center stage. Where previous philosophers had anchored knowledge in the external world or in the authority of tradition, Descartes made the self, in the moment of thought, the starting point for all inquiry. But Descartes' method did not stop at the cogito. Having established his own existence as a thinking thing, he sought to answer further questions. Can we know anything about the world outside our minds? Can we trust our reason beyond the immediate certainty of the cogito? These questions would lead Descartes deeper into the labyrinth of epistemology, exploring the relationship between mind and world, certainty and doubt, appearance and reality. The cogito, then, is not the end of Descartes' journey, but its indispensable beginning. It is the first stone laid in the construction of a new philosophical edifice, a foundation so secure that Descartes believed all true knowledge could be built upon it. In the Meditations, he describes the realization of the cogito as akin to waking from a dream, emerging into the clear light of certainty after the fog of doubt. This approach, so different from the received wisdom of the past, marked a turning point in European thought. Descartes' method of doubt and his focus on the thinking self as the foundation of knowledge signaled the rise of rationalism and the beginning of modern philosophy. His skepticism was not a retreat from knowledge, but a way to root out bias and error, to clear away the detritus of tradition and make room for true understanding. Descartes' influence, both in his own time and in the centuries that followed, cannot be overstated. His insistence on clear and distinct ideas, his radical method of doubt, and his discovery of the cogito reshaped the way philosophers approached the problem of knowledge. The Enlightenment thinkers who revived skepticism as a virtue and made reason the arbiter of truth owed much to Descartes' example. Yet the cogito, for all its apparent simplicity, opens up questions that remain with us still. What is the nature of the self that thinks? Can the certainty of the cogito be extended to the world beyond our thoughts? Is reason alone a sufficient guide to truth, or must we reckon with the limits of our own minds? Descartes offered his method as a way forward, but he did not pretend to have answered every question. In the end, his philosophy is as much an invitation to inquiry as it is a set of answers, a call to think, to doubt, and, above all, to seek certainty where we can find it. In this way, Descartes' cogito stands as both a milestone and a mystery, a moment when certainty is grasped, yet the journey of philosophy continues. The act of thinking for Descartes is not only proof of our existence but the beginning of our quest to understand all that is. Through doubt, he found certainty. Through certainty, he opened the way for knowledge itself. Imagine, for a moment, the world as a vast and intricate clockwork. Every star, every stone, every living creature, every beating heart, all are the workings of a grand, precise machine. In the mind of René Descartes, this vision of nature as mechanism rose to prominence, challenging ancient doctrines and reshaping the very questions philosophers and scientists would dare to ask. Yet within this grand machinery, Descartes discerned something utterly unlike cogs and wheels, a reality he claimed to know more intimately than the body itself. This was the mind, the seat of thought and consciousness, set apart from the world of matter. It was here, at the intersection of mind and matter, that Descartes set the stage for one of philosophy's most enduring puzzles. Descartes' doctrine, now called mind-body dualism, is both elegant in its simplicity and profound in its implications. At its core lies the conviction that mind and body, though intimately connected, are wholly distinct substances. The body belongs to the realm of matter. It is extended in space, measurable, and governed by the laws of physics. The mind, by contrast, is a thinking thing. It occupies no space, has no physical parts, and is known directly through its activities of doubting, willing, imagining, and understanding. Descartes draws a line sharper than any before him, marking off the territory of consciousness from the rest of the physical universe. This distinction, which philosophers call substance dualism, marks a radical departure from the prevailing views of Descartes' era. Where others had blurred the boundaries between soul and body, Descartes insisted on their fundamental difference. The mind is immaterial. It is not made of any physical substance, nor can it be located in the fabric of space. The body, on the other hand, is entirely material, subject to the push and pull of cause and effect, and composed of the same stuff as rocks and rivers. Descartes believed that, in principle, each could exist independently of the other, a view that raises as many questions as it answers. The implications of this dualism reach immediately into the heart of the so-called mind-body problem. If mind and body are so different, how is it that they interact? Descartes himself was acutely aware of the difficulty. He observed that the mind appears to command the body. A decision to raise one's hand results in the physical motion of muscles and bones. Conversely, the body impinges on the mind. The prick of a needle or the warmth of the sun is experienced as sensation. Yet if the mind is a non-physical substance, how can it set the body in motion? And if the body is governed by mechanical laws, how can it transmit information to an immaterial mind? Descartes did not dismiss these questions. In fact, he acknowledged the obvious connection between mind and body, noting that the union is so close that the mind can control the body and bodily sensations can affect the mind. He famously speculated that the point of contact might be the pineal gland, a small structure deep within the brain. Here, he suggested, the mind could somehow exert influence on the body and vice versa. While modern science has moved beyond this anatomical detail, the basic puzzle persists. How do two such different substances manage to communicate? Descartes' insistence on the real distinction between mind and body gave rise to a host of debates that continue to animate philosophy. Critics, both in his own time and centuries later, have pressed hard on the question of interaction. If the mind is truly outside the realm of matter, how does it avoid becoming a mere ghost in the machine, as the 20th century philosopher Gilbert Ryle would later put it? Would not the mind, so conceived, be incapable of moving the body or of being moved by it? Descartes' own solution, positing a special point of contact, has struck many as unsatisfying, a placeholder rather than a true explanation. Yet for all the difficulties, Descartes' dualism carved a path for new ways of thinking about consciousness and the nature of the self. By emphasizing the radical difference between mind and matter, he opened the door to questions that remain central to the philosophy of mind. What is it to be conscious? Is the mind just another part of nature, or does it stand apart in some fundamental way? Can science ever fully explain subjective experience, or will there always be something irreducibly private about thought? To understand why Descartes drew such a sharp distinction, one must turn to his vision of the physical world. Descartes was a pioneer of what came to be called mechanical philosophy. For him, all physical reality could be explained in terms of matter and motion. The universe, he argued, is made of tiny particles, he called them corpuscles, that combine and interact according to strict laws. There are no occult qualities, no mysterious forms animating matter from within. Instead, everything from the swirling of the planets to the beating of a heart can be understood as the operation of these corpuscles, moving and colliding in accordance with the principles of geometry and mechanics. In his treatise, The World, Descartes presented a strikingly modern picture of nature. He denied the possibility of a vacuum, arguing that all space is filled with matter, swirling and agitating in endless motion. The universe, on this account, is like a vast sea of particles, ceaselessly churning, so that even the heavens are not static but alive with movement. Descartes' cosmology imagined swirling vortices of matter, whose interactions could account for the formation and motion of the planets. These vortices, composed of different types of elements, luminous, transparent, and opaque, explained not only the movement of celestial bodies but even suggested that distant stars might be suns encircled by their own planets. This mechanical worldview was not limited to the heavens. Descartes applied the same framework to living beings, including plants, animals, and human bodies. The body, he held, is a machine, a complex arrangement of parts that respond to physical forces in predictable ways. Sensation, digestion, circulation, even the passions of the soul all are rooted in the mechanical interplay of corpuscles. In this sense, Descartes' vision swept away older explanations that invoked vital forces or spirits animating the body, replacing them with a rigorously physical account. But even as Descartes mechanized nature, he insisted that consciousness was something else entirely. The operations of the body may be explained by the laws of motion, but the activities of the mind, thinking, willing, imagining, are not reducible to the movement of particles. The mind is not extended in space, has no mechanistic parts, and cannot be measured in terms of weight or size. It belongs to a different order of reality, one that is accessible only through introspection and rational reflection. This separation of mind and body had far-reaching consequences, not only for philosophy, but for the development of science and medicine. Descartes' dualism provided the philosophical background for the modern medical system, which often treats the body as a machine to be repaired, while the mind is approached as a separate domain. The very idea that mental and physical health can be distinguished, though deeply contested, finds its roots in Descartes' division. At the same time, Descartes' mechanical philosophy offered the first distinctly modern articulation of laws of nature. He proposed a conservation principle for motion, blending older Aristotelian ideas with emerging scientific concepts. In doing so, he laid the groundwork for later physicists, even as his specific theories, such as the physics of vortices, were eventually superseded. The legacy of Descartes' dualism continues to reverberate. In the centuries since, philosophers have returned again and again to the question of the mind's place in nature. Dualists emphasize the radical difference between mind and matter, arguing that subjective experience cannot be captured by physical explanation alone. Their opponents contend that the mind must ultimately be rooted in the brain, a product of matter organized in complex ways. The debate remains unresolved, with advances in psychology and neuroscience shedding new light but offering no final answer. Descartes' own arguments for substance dualism remain central to the philosophy of mind. He maintained that the mind's ability to doubt, imagine, and understand proves its independence from the body. If the mind were nothing more than the body's motions, he argued, it would be limited to those activities that require a physical basis. But the mind's powers seem to transcend what can be explained by matter and motion. In his Meditations, Descartes carefully builds the case that the soul or mind exists and is distinct from the body. He combines arguments drawn from introspection with observations about the interaction between mind and body. He acknowledges, again, the obvious fact that the mind and body are connected. The mind directs the body, and the body's sensations impinge on the mind. Yet for Descartes, this connection does not erase their fundamental difference. The enduring influence of Descartes' ideas is evident in the persistent fascination with the mind-body problem. Philosophers, scientists, and laypeople alike continue to grapple with questions that Descartes set in motion. Is consciousness just a byproduct of neural activity, or does it represent something irreducibly different? Can machines ever be said to think, or is there something about human consciousness that escapes mechanistic explanation? Descartes' mechanistic model of the physical world, with its tiny corpuscles and swirling vortices, may seem antiquated in light of modern physics. Yet the underlying impulse to explain nature in terms of simple, universal laws remains at the heart of scientific inquiry. His refusal to accept mysterious forces or hidden qualities in matter paved the way for later developments, even as his dualism posed questions that science has yet to answer fully. Perhaps it is fitting that Descartes' dualism, for all its clarity, leaves us with a sense of mystery. The mind, that most intimate reality, stands apart from the world of matter, even as it acts upon and is acted upon by it. The body, governed by mechanical laws, is nonetheless animated somehow, mysteriously, by a thinking self. In seeking to understand the world and ourselves, Descartes bequeathed to us both the tools of rational inquiry and the abiding puzzle of how mind and matter might be joined. In the centuries that followed, critics would challenge Descartes' division. Some, like Gilbert Ryle, dismissed the mind as a myth, a ghost in the machine. Others would seek to reunite mind and body, or to explain consciousness in purely physical terms. Yet none could ignore the questions Descartes raised, nor the clarity with which he posed them. His dualism, for all its difficulties, remains a central point of reference for anyone who seeks to understand the relationship between mind, matter, and the mechanistic world. The search for answers continues, a testament to the enduring power of Descartes' vision.